I now move on to introduce lesson 32 of Ross, which will begin to introduce the weak verb, what he calls the irregular verb, and among those will be first guttural verbs and first Aleph verbs. Verbs in Hebrew are divided up into two groups: the strong verb, which we might call the regular, and weak verbs, which might be called irregular, although they are quite regular in their patterns, as we'll see. Strong verbs have been examined in the previous lessons, but in lessons 32 through 40, we're going to look at the various types of weak verbs. Now, it's convenient to have a system for designating the different types of weak verbs. And the older grammars use the paradigm verb of pa'al and use that as a mnemonic device, pa'al meaning to do or accomplish. And what they would do is, if there was a problem with the first letter of a root, they would say that would be a I-Guttural verb or a I-Aleph verb, using the pei to stand for the first letter of the root. Ayin would stand for the second letter of the root, and lamed would stand for the third letter of the root. And so you could talk about pei-yod verbs. Those are verbs that begin with the letter yod. Or you could talk about lamed hey verbs. That would be verbs that end with a hey in the third position, the lamed position. Again, first position pei, second position ayin, third position lamed. So you could have those kinds of categories. So you'll see that in some of the traditional grammars. I would rather use, personally, a different terminology, talk about first Aleph or first Yod, or second Aleph or second Yod, or second Guttural, or third Aleph or third Hey, and so 1, 2, and 3, and that's what Ross is mostly going to do, but just for your general information, there is the other system that would be, first position would be pei, second position would be ayin, third position would be lamed. So the first type of weak verb that Ross is going to introduce is the first guttural or pei-guttural verbs. First guttural verbs have a guttural letter in the first root letter. And in the imperfect, the imperative, and the infinitive forms, they are more complicated than in the perfect of these verbs. The irregularities, though, concern the pointing and not usually the loss of the guttural letter. So let me give you some examples here. So in the cal imperfect, if you have a first guttural verb, let's say an ayin, as in amad, which means to stand. So if you have an ayin in that first position, that's going to create some complications. Now, in the cal imperfect, what you would expect to have would be a hirik under the first consonant of the preformative of the imperfect, and a shavah under the ayin. But the problem is that ayin is a weak letter. It does not like vocal shavah, or it doesn't like any shavah as far as that goes. And so when you try to place a shavah under the ayin, and again, you have to understand, in my imagination, my letters talk to me. When you put a shavah under the ayin, it says, well, look, I'm a weak letter. I don't like shavahs. Give me a vowel. But I say to Mr. Ayin, no, the form is going to be an imperfect. And the pattern is hirik under the yod and the shavah under the first consonant of the root. So you got to have a shavah. But the ayin says, no, I can't take that. I'm weak. I need more support. And so you make a compromise. So you give half a patah, half a shavah, a hataf patah, and so you end up with the hataf patah there. But then, because of vowel harmonization, the hirik under the yod ends up going to a patah. So instead of getting yi mode, you get ya mode. Yi mode goes to ya mode. And it goes all the way through, as you can see. The only change is where you get a sagol, where you have a I vowel under the I-Aleph. I-Aleph prefers E vowels, and that influences the hataf vowel to be an E vowel. So you get a hataf sagol rather than a hataf patah in that particular position. Now, with the het, it works slightly differently. Here you have the verb chazak, which has to do with being strong. It's a stative verb. And because it has an A-class vowel rather than a O-class, as in amod, amod, this has an O-theme vowel, and here you have an A vowel, and that's going to affect the half vowel under the guttural. So again, you have a hirik. Theoretically, in theory, you should have had a hirik under the yod, a shavah under the het. Should have been yich zak, yichzak. But because of the guttural, it wants a half vowel, and so you end up giving it a hataf sagol, half shavah. And that influences the vowel under the yod. It goes from a hirik to being a sagol. And it's kind of a vowel pattern that if you have an A theme vowel, you'd get a sagol as the half vowel under the guttural. And that goes all the way through. Or to put it in Ross's words, instead of a simple shavah, compound shavah appears under the first guttural letter. Particular compound shavah corresponds to the class of the prefix vowel. Metheg is usually written before the composite shavah whenever a pretonic reduction occurs due to the adding of a verbal suffix. And the compound shavah becomes a full short vowel by the rule of shavah. So you start off with a rule here like you have ya'amodu. That's the form you should get. But then what happens, that's one thing I didn't point out. When you add the u ending, well, that reduces the o vowel to a shavah, but now that you have two shavahs together, and so you get a patah here instead. If you go back up to here, where you have the third common plural, when you add the u ending, that causes this to reduce to shavah. It should have been a ya-madu, but then because this became ya-ah with a hataf patah there, then by rule of shavah, the half vowel becomes a full vowel. And then the metheg is put here to say that, well, even though that's a unaccented open syllable, we're going to let you keep a short vowel anyway. Kind of contrary to the usual rules. And so in the cases, you get it also in the second masculine plural, where the theme vowel reduces to shavah, then the vowel of the half vowel becomes a whole vowel. And so that's how that will work. Same thing would be true of the form with sagol. Here it starts off being a hataf sagol, as you can see in the third feminine plural. But then when you add the u ending for the second masculine plural, that will force the theme vowel, a vowel, to reduce to shavah, and then the half vowel will become a whole vowel under those circumstances. Both the vocalizations patterns, first common singular suffix aleph has a sagol. So Segol, even here, again, the Aleph likes E vowels. And so that even influences what is usually an A half vowel, Hataf Patah, into being a Hataf Segol. The preterite and the gessive forms follow the same vocalization patterns. So the imperfect is Ya'mod. The preterite is, with a vav consecutive, would be a vai Ya'mod. The gessive would be the Ya'mod. Those are all pretty much the same. Now, when you want to go to a cal imperative, the imperative form of a first guttural follows the pattern of the regular verb, but have the compound shavah in place of a simple shavah. So if you have a regular verb like pakad that we've been using as a paradigm, it should be pakod. And with amad, you should get a shavah under the first consonant and a holum under the second consonant, but because of the guttural, it gets a hataf patah. And then the same thing with hazak. You end up with a hataf patah. Now, you end up, if you look back at the paradigm up here for hazak, you mostly got segols, but when there's no preformative, you end up with the hataf patah. Now, when you make it imperative, feminine singular, the paradigm for the strong verb would be peak D, and that does not try to put a shavah under a guttural, and so those are regular in the first guttural forms. Same thing with the masculine plural. Follows exactly the same pattern as the strong verb. It's only in the feminine plural where you try to put a shavah under the first consonant of the root, pekodna, in the verb pakad. Well, there you get the hataf patah in both cases. With the cal infinitive construct of first guttural verbs, the pattern of the infinitive construct, if you go back to the paradigm of pakad, is to have a shavah under the first consonant and a holum between the second and third consonant. Well, if you try to do that to the ayin there, it doesn't like it, ends up with the hataf patah. And so to stand is amod, and you can write that with preposition la, and then by rule of shavah, you have two shavahs in the row. In this case, since it's a composite shavah, the vowel under the lamed will be the vowel of the half vowel, and so you'll get a la amod to stand if you add preposition la to it. Again, that's not unusual. That's the rule that you would normally expect. Now, if you add a pronominal suffix to amod, however, that will cause the accent to shift back, and so you end up with a kamat satuf, omdi, my standing, and when the accent shifts back, you no longer have a shavah there, so you don't get the hataf type vowel. So all of this is first guttural type verbs. And I think I will end the video here and move on to first Aleph verbs in the next video.